All right, folks, crypto market updates. Happy Thursday, last day of February. Maybe I'll see less snow soon. We shall see. All right, so looking at Bitcoin, choppity chop, had a sell off at resistance, right? So this is why you need to avoid buying anything at resistance. Usually resistance is a place where people take profit, so on and so forth. So you need either a nice clean break above resistance, or now if it were to ramp up, retest again, and then break, it would probably be a little bit more convincing because of the consolidation that happened at this resistance point.
Yeah, and that would be the fifth touch.
Yeah, exactly. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so it's 4 times it's kind of tagged this general area up here. Let's just look at this quickly. Not really much there.
Yeah.
Just a lot of chop.
Yeah, you can pull up a few different types of trend lines. I posted a chart in chat this morning, Rock. I'm not sure if you saw that one. But I was basically talking about kind of my plan. If we do test that for a fifth time and get a breakout, that'll be much, much more compelling.
All right, let me see if I can find this chart. All right. Let's pull this up for everyone to see. Yeah, that makes sense. Fairly range bound right now. What's interesting is if it did ramp back up to break, could see right here just retested the prior resistance zone here. If it could stay above this line, that'd be nice. But right now it's just kind of range bound. This week I showed an example of a short scalp setup on Ripple. So basically Bitcoin's a lot of sideways right now. For anyone who so happens to be inclined to try to scalp shorter time frames or try to get some action out of this choppiness, there are certain habits in this crypto market that tend to be a little bit more predictable. I'll get into that a bit right now, since there's a lot of chop. Basically, one of the habits happens to be exchange listings, right? So we know that Coinbase, for example, likes to have random exchange listings, so there's not a lot of lead up into it. Some that's just speculate on that. But just as an example for Ripple, I just showed it people a setup, a possible trade setup, and you look at it on the 1D chart, it's basically nothing. It's absolutely, I think scalp smaller, kind of like I call it sniper scalping. One thing that one can do is if we get down to a smaller time frame, see that this was the Coinbase listing right here. So it had a dump with everything else. Then it started to ramp up. And then this was the Coinbase listing candle, right? You can kind of see it just ramped up right into resistance. So generally what happens is maybe there's a possibility that maybe some people know about it and get in a little bit early. That's speculation. What happens as soon as people hear about it, boom, you get this massive green candle. People start FOMOing. They get all hypey. Maybe some people buy into resistance. So just kind of like knowing that these tend to have retraces. I just showed a live example in the chat when I was scalping of a short or scalp setup that I would take. I believe it was like right here. So basically just small targets like 5%. And then if you want to leave a runner for full retrace, 10%. Nothing too fancy. but it's basically there's already a wick here, sellers stepping in, right? You often see whenever a market, one of these markets is going to chop around or dump, you'll often see like a little bit of a wick. And what I did is I just kind of, as an example, what I would do is I would have, let's say, a very, very tight stop. So I think I was a little bit lower than that. So like, let's say 1. And then first target was around 5%, let's say. So that would have been, in this case, let's say like a 5 to 1. And then if it hit the second target, right, which it did, 10%. Now I didn't take this trade because, like I said, I'm minimizing my taxable events, but I want to show this as an example. For anyone in the States, also in relation to stuff like taxable events, for anyone in the States, one possible strategy that could work for you in crypto that I was thinking about tax-wise is that you have long-term and short-term capital gains. So apparently in the States, anything sold under a year is short-term, and that just gets added to your income. But if you hold something longer than a year, then I think a max tax you could get on is like 20% or something like that. It varies depending on your income. So one thing that one can do, if one doesn't want to flip back and forth between Bitcoin and shitcoins are one thing, that there is one benefit to leverage scalping or BitMEX trading, which is everything's calculated in Bitcoin and it's just futures contracts. So that's one benefit. So for example, let's say as a possible strategy for anyone in the States, let's say, you know, you buy some stuff at the lows and you're saying, okay, let's see if the year 2020, 2021, if we can produce new highs, perhaps hold crypto until then. It's dependent on which crypto asset as well. And then one could trade futures or something like that, or just stick to, because all these markets are correlated. Another way one can do it is just like stick to a few markets that you trade and then keep your investment coins separate from the trading so that you can benefit from some long-term capital gains on some of the assets. In Canada, it's a little bit different because either you're a trader, you're an investor type of thing, so that we don't have short or long term. So, you know, for me to get into the capital gains category, I would pay a max of 25% instead of 50 something. So that means I have to minimize my trading and lean more towards longer term. But this would just be an example of the type of scalps that I would take, even on smaller stuff on BitMEX. We've seen these listings flop many times before. In fact, it's been quite common for 2018 to have these kind of flopping markets on these sell on the news basically type of thing. There you go. So I listed one example. They were a lot more drastic in the past. Obviously, with this sideways market, that Ripple move would have been quite small. But, you know, when you're scalping, when I was scalping, I'd often scalp for just 5% moves, stuff like that, right? Very smaller moves, but you could get much bigger moves. So for example, here's a Coinbase listing, and it did go up again, but it did drop 27%. Now you wouldn't be able to short ZRX. There's another one, I think it was BAT. Here's BAT, Coinbase listing, 15% drop. So it's basically like it's a reactionary thing. Suddenly, no one knows about it. Then all of a sudden, everyone's getting euphoric and bullish and doing like backflips, and you see this massive spike candle. And then on a smaller time frame, you start to see sellers stepping in. That could be a quick short for a scalp. And of course, I would set, because we're dealing with a leverage game, set very tight stops. Usually, like if I were to see a wick here and sellers step in, it makes it very easy for me on that one candle to determine where I want to set my stop. Be like, all right, if it breaks that intraday high and it doesn't hit lower targets, like let's say here, oftentimes when you have these retraces, they'll hit like prior resistance turn support areas, just like here. And they can, obviously this can push up higher, But this is pretty much like, it's like day trading, right? It's just day trading. It's just trading like this one candle here. And usually I wouldn't even hold positions overnight unless I hit my first targets. And maybe I'd leave a runner. So for example, that XRP trade would have had to have been held overnight to get that 10%, but the first 5% target would have been hit. So that would reduce the risk. So that's just trading, pretty much like intraday action, day trading. You can see it time and time again. Most of these coins you can't even short, but if there's any coins that one can short, when you see these massive spikes, like sellers stepping in, and sometimes there is risk to that too, because if you're at resistance and let's say you're in a strong bull trend, the risk would be if it just pops and breaks out and goes nuts, then you could get hurt on slippage on your stops, right? But this is like a catalyst. This is like combining a market spike with a, you know, selling the news event, exchange listing, something like that. You see it with like Binance and any real exchange listings. What was even like Holochain initially when it went on Binance? It had a big spike, and then it sold off and dumped. Basically, you know, profit takers step in. Now again, this is not a coin that you could short. Profit takers come in, and obviously a nice 56% drop. So there's tons of action on that. So that's just one predictable habit and pattern in crypto that we've seen. That might change on a bull market. Obviously in a bear market, we're seeing a lot more chop, a lot more full retraces. In a bull market, on a bullish news event, you could actually have a lot of follow through where it doesn't sell off at resistance and it just rallies even for days possibly in a strong bull market like 2017 style bull market. So you obviously have to base it on the market that's in front of you, but there is intraday action that one can do in this choppy volatility. So this is just a few examples. Aside from that, just a whole lot of ups and downs. This random coin here seems like it. I don't even know what this is. Just came out of nowhere. 28 million in volume on some exchanges I've never heard of for a coin I've never heard of. Anybody know this coin? ABBC coin. Anyways, it's too bad that a lot of these coins aren't shortable too, just for those stupid spikes, because they do. It's almost like inverted bounce plays. It's just kind of counter trading big moves that aren't sustainable. That at least have to have a retrace, even if they do continue to move up. Oftentimes, they have to have a retrace. So this ticker is ABBC. Let's see ABBC. Nope. Anyways, some random coin. It's up a ton from the ethers. Market cap. So market cap 0, and then suddenly it goes up to. Anyways, it's probably hot air. Anytime I see something like that, I stay away. I'll never chase some coin that's up 163% in a day. But congrats if anybody had any of that. For me, that would definitely be a take profit signal. Anytime there'd be like a really stupid gain, unless it's a really long-term investment, I would take that as take profit, because those don't tend to be sustainable unless you're in a very strong bull trend. Gainers and losers. So this is pretty much the high volume one for now. Some other random coins. So this can often happen with the liquid markets that are smaller cap markets. They get a bit of attention or volume and they pop off because it's a very thin order book. So it doesn't take much for them to pop doubles and so on and so forth. And, you know, could look good to pop a double, but one might not be able to get a decent enough position size on something like that. Looking at
Yeah,
hollow
one thing we talked about last week is, whenever we're looking at those exchanges, just, if you're sorting by, like on the gainers losers list and you see a dollar amount of trading activity, like go in and look at the exchanges, because there's just so many games being played by these crappy overseas exchanges that are showing like $10 million worth of volume, and there's really nothing there. So got to be
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just seeing a lot more obscure exchanges popping up out of nowhere. Since I'm on the holochain chart, if let's say I didn't have any holochain and I wanted some holochain, I would probably, if we had a dip that retested this area, I would probably buy some on a dip if I wanted some. Just retest prior resistance and support, could even go a little bit lower. So see, it's lost some of that initial momentum. There wasn't any follow through. So now we're leaning more towards this scenario where you get kind of like a retrace down to prior resistance zones. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this test this area, maybe do some of this before its next move up, if it has another move up. Of course, no guarantees. Let's see, any tickers you folks want to look at? We could look at a few tickers before we jump into news.
Yeah, I pulled up that Fetch AI. Looks like it's down about 35% on the listing day. That big red wall of listing death.
What's the ticker on that?
FET BTC.
FET.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
The problem with a lot of these coins that get listed is you can rarely take advantage of being able to short those listings because there's no markets for it.
Yeah. What's the USD value? Let's see. Josh said it was
34 cents.
Yeah. Okay. Huh. Yeah, he is. Yeah, one thing I was looking at.
This could be so if one can't short, then another possible trade setup for a scalp intraday stuff is when you get a big sell-off on an exchange listing and then you start to see a bounce. There's usually a lot of volatility intraday on exchange listings, but one just has to set their line in the sand, their stops, and you're pretty much just trying to play off of the momentum. There's no real technical patterns or anything to base off of. So, if I'm scalping, I usually always have smaller target of 5%, which is a lot easier to achieve as an initial goal, and then leave some runners just in case it does stupid stuff. In this instance, it's already up about 7%. I would have wanted to catch it a little bit.
If you don't mind playing Russian roulette on a listing day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just. Interesting. All right. So it's probably, I wouldn't be surprised if this. And then what you'll notice is the volatility is it'll be big initially, and then unless it has a rally, it'll usually simmer down a bit once the hype simmers down, and it won't be as volatile. So when I used to scalp, I would only scalp the initial volatility, and then as the volatility simmered, I would stop. Mm-hmm. Usually it's just maybe it's only one trade a day, but you could literally, just for that one trade, you could literally sit at your computer for 10 hours waiting for your target to hit too. So it can be time consuming to play that smaller stuff.
And it would actually be a good practice for anybody that's curious. If you just look back at, say, the past 2 years worth of new listings on either Binance or, I would say if you're looking at 2016, look at like Polo and Bittrex last year or two, Binance or even Coinbase, and just look at how stuff performs once it does get listed. If it's the first time it got listed from an ICO and it's above the ICO price, usually you get that really ugly red candle, or kind of a bounce and then, kind of a slow sell off until the next rally. But it is interesting, and it's probably a good exercise for anybody that hasn't done that before.
Yeah, and I guess for the listing, it depends on the timing. What season is it? If you something like this, Loon getting listed right before peak euphoria on Binance, then suddenly it pops up in a matter of a few weeks. It pops up 400%. But if you were looking, let's just see what that would translate to on Bittrex. Same thing. Yeah. So this is what you didn't see. What we didn't see in that was all of this sell off, right? So most of them, so that one was interesting because that one got listed, sold off, and then rallied weeks afterwards. So that's obviously like the difference between a bull trend and a bear trend in crypto. Whereas now there's not even follow through. I mean, this Ripple Binance listing for not Binance listing, Coinbase listing was actually quite pathetic when you think about it.
That's Bittrex, I think.
Yeah, I'm just looking at their USD chart.
Oh, okay.
So this is the listing. So this is, I think it started from here to here. That like 10%. It's fairly pathetic compared to some of the moves we've seen in the past. So, on the larger scale, this is very small and minuscule, right? So that's why personally my strategy is just to wait for the next cycle, bigger moves, so on and so forth. But for those who are inclined to, trade more, get more experience under their belt, I'd say play around scalping, sniper scalping, smaller time frames, just manage risk. Don't get liquidated, do crazy stuff.
Hey, Rock, if you don't mind pulling up my BTC chart, there were a couple questions in Discord I wanted to answer.
All right.
So David was asking, okay, so let me just kind of recap what this is. So right now, obviously we're mid-range. We've had 4 touches of the 4,200 area, kind of lower highs or equal highs, depending on how you run those trend lines. But you can see that circle. And actually last week, let me pull up my watch list real quick from last week, that chart. Actually, was it an alert? I can't remember. Anyway, I had marked up that zone before that big red day on the 4th touch and said, hey guys, like this is the danger zone. Be careful. Because I see a lot of people like in the general public, usually on, the Twidiots on Twitter that are like buying into resistance. And that's why I was calling that the danger zone. Yeah, exactly, Harry. Yeah, the danger zone from last week. So I had that marked up. In, what the biggest mistake that people can make is like looking at like an hourly chart and only focusing on what looks like a really strong trend, right? Where once we bounced off of support of 3,400 and then we were testing the 4,000 level, a lot of people were getting all excited like, oh man, I'm going to buy into this level. And then they get freaked out. They buy the high and then they sell the low of that red candle, right? That's why I just think it's really smart if you're looking to catch the meat of bigger moves. You don't want to buy into resistance, or like we saw a lot of people do on the 6K break a few months ago, where they were shorting prior to the break, and then a lot of people got squeezed by random pops. Yeah, is that it? Yeah, thanks, Harry. And yeah, so basically what I would look for is a strong green day, basically like looking at the daily chart, and it's not always perfect because sometimes the volume comes in a little bit later, but if you can see signs of strong volume up above that yellow circle, that would be the first sign that a bigger move to the upside could be coming. But anywhere inside of 3,400 to 4,400, things can just get really choppy. And you can see that midline of 3,800 has become kind of a magnet. And, another way to say that is equilibrium, right? Where the market kind of finds stability during consolidation period. So when you get below it, it bounces back up to it. When you get above it, it pulls back to it. So, I know a couple of people have reached out to me over the past week and said, hey, Chris, what do you think of like channel trading, where you basically, buy support, sell resistance? Like that's okay. And if you're comfortable with that strategy, then by all means go for it. I typically tend to stay away from channel trading just because in my experience, over the past 15 plus years of trading different markets, the risk to reward just isn't always the best. And if there is a breakout or a breakdown, you usually get trapped and just weird stuff can happen. So I tend to stay away from trying to trade ranges. I'm just much more excited about breakouts and breakdowns and continuation type trades because in my experience, that's just where you get the better reward to risk ratio, right? So with that said, if we chop around, and what I said in the market chat was there's, I'm basically preparing for both scenarios. So scenario one would be longing a breakout above 400, but keeping in mind, or 4,400, keeping in mind that we are in a bear market and there are a lot of bag holders. So I wouldn't treat a breakout of that level the same way that I would treat like, when we were trading 2016, if you look at those like 6-month breakouts, I wouldn't treat it the same as that because we're not in a bull market. That's really the biggest thing. When you're in a bear market and you're staring at that red wall of death from 20K, the reason why the market puts in lower highs is because of bag holders, right? When prices pop and you get into resistance areas, you have a whole lot of people that see that, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. So what I would do is if we did get a break of that, I would definitely be interested in buying, but I would be doing a few things. Number one, I would be trading smaller size, so it wouldn't be like swinging for the fences. Number two, I would keep tighter stops. So I would identify like, okay, if this thing reverses, which it could reverse at any minute, where would I want to get out? And I would be much, much tighter with risk. And then the third thing is I would pre-identify profit targets based on extensions or just prior support turned resistance areas. And I would absolutely be taking at least half off at the first profit target. Right. That's just my methodology. That's how I trade breakouts in a bear market. Now, the other side of that is if we break down, if we get a good setup, and again, I don't always do this, but seeing how we're already so low, I'm not super excited about shorts right now, but I may, depending on what the price action develops into, I may take a short to hedge any sell-off. But if we get a panic, like say we got a 30 to 50% panic, then I would look to quickly reverse that and buy a dip. And then, we've talked about this flow many, many times, but that's basically what I would be looking for is like, okay, if we do break below 3,400, is there a way to kind of hedge with a short? And then what I would do, and David, to answer your question, you're asking, well, does that mean the bottom would be around 2,400? Well, whenever the market panics, I don't try to guess where the bottom's going to be. What I do is I actively watch price action. So like as the panic is happening, it depends on how fast it happens. We obviously know where the prior areas are. We've marked them up on charts for the past year. But the idea is whenever a panic is happening, you don't know where the low is going to be. You want to let price action be your guide, right? And then Beva time, would you be looking to short on the breakdown of 3,400 or 3,200? It just seems like there might be a good chance of finding support. Yeah, I agree with you. And that's why I would wait to see if we got a 1, 2, 3, 4 breakdown pattern that's set up. And if not, I would just leave it alone. Now, say we were up around the highs and we got a setup like that, I would be much more prone to shorting. But seeing that we're already down, 70, 80% over the past year, I'm much less interested in shorting now than I would be near the highs, right? And then got a question about, if BTC could pump because of the ETH fork. I don't really know. I don't have any information that gives me an edge one way or the other. Rock, do you have any opinion on that?
I think Ethereum would have a better chance of making a move in relation to the fork than Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Ethereum's forks don't really phase the Bitcoin markets that much. So pretty much everything's correlated to Bitcoin right now.
Yeah.
To Ethereum. But yeah, that's happening in like a half an hour or something like that. So far, could just be like sell on the news. We don't know how the market's going to react. Usually when there's an event like that, if I was like day trading the event, often what I would do is if an extreme move were produced as a result of the event, then I would, once that move is made, I would react. I would try to catch a retrace, right? So for example, if there was like a big short on the news, like let's say this was the fork, and then you see it starting to dump and break down or whatever, then that could be like a good short or a sell. Or if there was like a massive sell-off and then possibly a little bit of a bounce, just smaller targets, especially in this type of market, whereas before you'd have much bigger moves leading up. So this fork right now, price action wise, kind of seems like a bit of a non-event to me. It doesn't really seem like the market's responding one way or the other, but people will use any excuse that they have in their arsenal for some last minute shenanigans.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that. Like, I don't like to anticipate what the markets are going to do before news. I like to see like, okay, let the news event come out and see how, if really any people react to it. Sometimes you'll have, scheduled news events where it comes out and everybody kind of is already expecting something and it doesn't really do anything to the markets. Other times it's a surprise and you get a panic or a FOMO breakout. And sometimes, like Rock said, like you can counter trade that, but to try to guess is really dangerous.
And sometimes you get these Darth Vader candles that wipe out both longs and shorts.
Yeah.
In one shot. So we were all waiting for this like ETF news, finger on the trigger, right? And looked like it was breaking out. Oh, look, it's breaking out. And then boom, massive, massive sell-off. And I think it was on BitMEX. So for anybody who was trading that, if you were, let's say, short here, even though that was the right move to be in because there's this big dump, there was a pop that happened on BitMEX where the price in one candle shot up to 30K. That probably would have liquidated just about everyone.
Yeah.
Regardless of leverage, right?
It was crazy how much fear was in the markets at that point. That's when I did that video, like talking about is Bitcoin crashing, and people were just convinced that it was dying. And I'm like, guys, this is the start, man.
Yeah, and this doesn't seem like much, but this is quite some volatility for
hell yeah, 40% range.
Yep. for one day, right?
Yep.
And then that led to all kinds of fun shenanigans after.
Yep. So I see a couple questions about accumulation right now. Like, where are we? And what does this look like? Like, as of right now, so this is my opinion, right? So right now we have, several like even highs. And we haven't had like a capitulation low, right? Like, if anything, this looks just more like consolidation to me. Yeah, exactly like Rocky's showing. You know, you've got higher lows, you got lower highs. I'm not convinced that this is the true bottom yet. It could be, and I think what I'm looking for is confirmation of that. I'm not trying to guess that. What I would look for is either a big washout, like 30 to 50% on massive volume for a bounce. That would show either capitulation or some kind of breakout above 4,400. And then if that could hold, that would be kind of an early sign of a trend reversal. But if you compare like to the earlier accumulation patterns, like my gut is telling me, and we won't know until after the fact, but I just don't think this is the true bottom accumulation yet. I don't know Rock, what are you thinking about that?
It's definitely, hard to tell. We did, if we break out on some volume out of this range, like if we have volume like this, right, on the other side, then that would certainly be convincing. What's interesting though with this is that we had this large volume. I mean, this is big volume compared to what we had for most of 2018, except for this sell-off here and this sell-off here.
Yep.
But unlike other high volume sell-offs, and this was, percentage-wise, this is from here to here, it's like 44%. It didn't have a sharp wick and bounce play, right?
Yeah.
This is like a bit of an anomaly for the level of volume and the percentage move that it made, because typically in typical Bitcoin fashion, when you get that, you usually get a pretty big bounce play, even if it's just to make a lower high and then roll over. Yep. Instead, it had a little bounce, rolled over some more, and just start chopping around sideways.
Yeah.
Right?
I think the reason why I did that is because that to me, if you just like look at an inverted chart of that looks exactly like one of the 2016 breakouts, right? Where you have a 6-month kind of resistance line and then it breaks that, right? That's exactly what happened here. It was like 6K was the line of hope, right? There were a lot of people hoping that 6K would hold up. And when it didn't, that created a cascade effect of selling. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you just have to V bottom off of that, right? So right now, this is like the first consolidation after that first break. And as we've seen in prior trends, like you can get second and third extensions, like basically trend continuation. So if say 4,200 holds as resistance and we get a breakdown, I would actually be looking at an extension from the 6K minus the low minus the retracement, which would put us, I believe, in the mid twos. Let me run an extension based on that. I'll post the. Yeah, here, let me post this chart. So this is kind of what I'm looking at. If we get trend continuation to the downside, there's really two extensions. There's the 61% and the 100%. The first area lines up in the like 2,300 area. Right, so that's the bear case. And if something like that happens, say we got, I mean, this is pretty extreme, but say we got like a really gnarly panic to where it went from, say it didn't even slow down at the 61 and it dumped from where we are now down to the 100, which is another 70%, something like that, like over a 2 to 3 day period, I would be going heavy long. Whereas if it was like a slow grind, I wouldn't be trying to pick the bottom. It all depends on how fast the sell-off is.
That would be if it dumped down to like that zone, that'd be like a free money long.
Yeah, because if you got something that fast, the capitulation, even a 50% bounce off of the low, which is a high probability when you have an extreme panic like that, that is such a big move on a dollar basis. Like if a 50% bounce from the 100% extension is like nothing. It's like, you know, to like 1,500 or 1,600, right? So you could actually get, in a lot of cases, like probably a retest of 2,400, which would be 150% move. So that's the type of panic dip buys that I look for, or those just extreme examples where you get so much range, or confirm breakout, you know, where what I don't want to do is just like average down, average down, average down, average down, try to pick a low in a slow grind market. That's where you just get run over, right?
Yeah. So the thing with that, if we did make it down to those lows, that would be an anomaly. In my opinion, that would be making this time different, because that percentage wise from the high, that'd be the lowest Bitcoin has ever gone in a cycle.
That would be a full retrace of even the 2017 beginning of the trend cycle. So no, I agree. And look, like I think it's healthy and it's good to explore all of those options, right? To look at what is the extreme bear case, what is the extreme bull case, and what's the base case? What's the mid-range, or, you know, what's the higher probability play? That way, like, even if you look at it and you go, wow, like that would be extreme, that would be crazy, that would be, you know, an outlier move, at least you know what that would look like. That way you can, you know, kind of create a plan for it. What my goal in the markets is not to be right all the time. It's to not be surprised. You know, it's to have a plan for whatever the market throws at you, right? Because you can't control the outcome, right? All you can do is make your best educated guess based on the information we have today, but have a plan of action for any possible scenario, just like a chess player would do.
So looking at the current structure on this descending triangle, if we did, on the bull side, if we did break out of that, I'm still kind of waiting for a retest. Might not happen, but let's see, let's show other examples. Like for example, when we had this massive consolidation, we did have a retest of prior resistance turn support. It was very quick.
Yeah. And I think that was actually the Bitfinex hack.
Yeah, it was the Bitfinex hack. So there's a little bit of a
we
black swan
on Bitfinex. So the short worked. It's just we lost money because Bitfinex lost money.
Yeah, they recovered, what was it, 20 Bitcoin or something?
Yeah.
Woo!
That's a lesson in diversifying your position between multiple exchanges.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, to me, this is like the longest retest I think I've ever waited for on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So it's like watching paint dry. A few tickers.
I bought some BAT today.
Yeah?
Yeah. Just a starter position. The chart looks like crap, but just a starter position. I know there's been some news coming out this week, and so it got a little bit of juice. But I mean, it's just one of those things where it's an actual product, right? So like it has a real use case. I don't think there's a lot of people using the browser yet, but I've been playing around with it a little bit, setting up some accounts and, looking at how you can either earn or, contribute. And so it's just a very small starter position. But I mean, if you look at the prices compared to, let me see, I think was Bittrex the first one to list it?
Bittrex BTC chart, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the oldest chart, I believe.
Kind of see it just keeps on spiking into resistance here.
Yeah, so this is one where it kind of reminds me of like a Civic or something like that, where it's very range bound. I mean, you know, trading off of the chart would just be extremely boring. It's got a little bit of an accumulation type price action, right? Where it's holding higher lows. You've got the defined resistance. So again, this starter position is just enough to like get it on my radar and start playing with it a little bit. And then if we can actually get a network effect where people start using it and the value starts to increase, there's some very clear areas where a breakout where I would actually add in and build into like a real position.
Yeah, on the USD chart, kind of broke out of this range right down here.
Yeah, it's got a little juice because of the news that came out this week. But again, I mean, it's nothing that I'm like, hey guys, I'm swinging for the fences on this. It's just prices are super low right now. They've got a real product. They've got real development. So this is what I do is like, I'll put out feelers, right? Like if there's a real product or if there's something that, you know, I think the team is doing a good job, then I'll flirt with it. I'll open a little position. I'll play with whatever the product is. I'll learn about it. I'll follow, you know, all their media, their newsletters, all that stuff, and just kind of start to get engaged, right? And then if the chart and the fundamentals start to develop into something that looks like it could lead to a multi-month or a multi-year bull market, then I'll build into like a real position. But right now it's just a starter. I'm starting to work with it. So if you guys have any experience with the Brave browser or BAT in general, or have any perspective on that, like I'd be more than happy to talk to you or hear what you have to say about it.
And then with a full position, there's an evolutionary process. If it suddenly pops a 100x, then that converts into a BAT tattoo, which converts into bat maximalism.
Yeah.
There you go, like bat face tats, and you know, like
that's right.
I just bought a mansion from bat.
Start shaming people that use Chrome and Firefox.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Start trolling them on Twitter.
Batman. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, this is the reason why I'm so interested in crypto is, you know, you have projects that are in line with the ethos of cryptography and privacy and security, right? And that's what, you know, we're going through a period of time where Facebook and Google and all these guys are getting roasted because of all of these, you know, breaches and, you know, privacy concerns. And so BAT and the Brave browser are looking to offer something better. So I'm like, absolutely, let me explore this. Let me invest a little bit when prices are low. You know, so that's kind of my that's like my crypto geek hat. My investor hat is saying like it's still too risky right now to take on like a quote unquote real position. But it's enough for me to be interested and start following it and dedicating a few minutes every day to seeing what's happening. So and that's what I do. Like I have kind of like what I call like my short list, watch list of like real projects that are out there that I just stay engaged with. And then once we notice like early signs of, hey, you know, this is picking up, then we can build into a position. I like doing that much rather than waiting for some kind of hype to hit and then like feeling like I have to rush or chase, right? Like if I'm a little bit early and like say this goes to zero and I lose my starter position, like I really don't give a shit. But if it turns out to be something where it's like, hey, you know, you have a starter and you were focused on it early enough to where when it did wake up, you were able to build into a real position still very early. That's kind of what we did with Ethereum back in the day. It's like we were exploring it and focusing on it, but I didn't invest in the ICO and I didn't trade it, Rock, for the first, what was it, 6 or 9 months that it was just kind of dead on the chart. And then once it started waking up, we started trading some like pretty serious size on it. So it's kind of the same mentality there.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. A couple more tickers and then we'll get into some of the news. So we got a request for DRD. Looks like random spikes. Looks like it had this random spike on a thin order book. BRD, let's just bread. Volume's like so. I bet you it's mostly Binance. It's all Binance. So investment wise, this is, in my opinion, it's been listed for a year, and this is the only exchange it's on. No, it's on other exchanges too. It's on a few, but for some reason it's not listing that on CoinMarketCap. But when Binance is the majority of its volume, then that becomes risky for delisting. Speaking of delisting, what was that coin that got delisted from Binance? Was it Salt?
Salt. There was another one too.
Let's see what happened to Salt. Any good things come from this? Nope. So basically, I was talking about how if something gets delisted and if the exchange is like 2/3 of its volume or whatever,
Yeah.
I usually will just cut it to stop the bleeding. So stopping the bleeding would have been like, maybe 15% break from support. But since it started to dump it, now it's down like 35. So, and it's probably just be like a slow bleed. It might end up doing one of these, just bleeding out. Almost maybe it will end up being kind of like a TRST. When that got delisted, it just kind of turned into gutter trash. Although the sell-off was a lot more violent. So I don't really mess around with coins when they get delisted like that, unless, of course, it's actually a really, really good project and the exchange is just not being reasonable. And then a request for ZCL. I haven't really. I was like scalping this as it was dumping, catching these little bounces here or whatever. But I haven't really been interested in touching this since it's massive pump and dump Z Classic turned into Bitcoin private airdrop type of thing. So yeah, I don't really mess with this coin very much since this activity. Seems like it's done a full retrace. If I were to ever take a punt at a less liquid coin that's done a full retrace, it would be a very reasonable small. Actually, the volume's like non-existent here, so I wouldn't even touch this myself. That's just me. Obviously, like what kind of position size can one get on 18K in volume? Not very much. So this is my opinion on that. But you never know. Just because I don't like something, I won't touch it because it's not my risk profile. Doesn't mean it won't pump or do stupid things. Even absolute, all kinds of shit coins pump randomly and sometimes during bull trends and so on and so forth. So aside from all that, so ETH fork's happening as we speak. Let's see one last check before we get into the news, see if anything's happening with this. Any market reaction? Nope, hardly anything. So not much there. I'll start pulling up some stuff for news. Let's see, pull up some links that I was sharing with Chris. Interesting things happening this week. So obviously one big thing again is the whole Samsung phone, right? What was it? I think they have the news this week was some partnerships with some ERC20s. I'll be listed on it. What was BAT one of them too? Which one was it? Cosmo Chain and so on and so forth. So this kind of like reminds me of coins pumping on the Azure listings when Microsoft Azure, when they got listed on that site, blockchain as a service, stuff like Lisk and whatever. In 2016, you'd have these random FOMO spikes as a result of that. I think Cosmo had a big spike on that news. It's a smaller cap coin, so probably would have made a fairly big move on that percentage-wise. You can kind of see big spike. Oops, why isn't this working? Yeah, I think one day it was up like 80% or something. Not super liquid, but obviously one can't short into those spikes or whatever. So, perhaps if one could catch it early and then take some quick profit or whatnot. But anytime I see like a big news event like that leads to spike, if I have some of that coin and I was trading it, to me, that would just be a take profit signal, maybe with the intent of rebuying in cheaper just because of the volatility on those intraday spikes that happen on those news events. I mean, in this current market, they just all get sold into from bag holders or profit takers for the most part. So that probably won't be the last we'll hear of the Samsung phone and other markets. Slightly more, I guess you could say, pessimistic news. This has been the big news of the week for Coinbase. There's been kind of like a campaign, delete Coinbase. I guess they're mimicking the whole delete Facebook campaign or whatever. But they basically acquired a company that was created by founders or high up members of Hacking Team. And this is basically a team that was selling hacking tools and basically information to, I guess you could say, fascist governments, or just for like nefarious, I guess you could say totalitarian type reasons. So it doesn't really line up with the ethos of crypto very well. So this is basically a blockchain analytics. Coinbase that acquired them, regardless of their controversy. We're talking about, like, they're helping out stuff like the people in the Saudi government who executed that journalist and that kind of stuff, Sudan, Ethiopia, stuff like that, right? Just to basically go after activists or anyone dissenting against the government. And oftentimes that can lead to, persecution or even death for those participants, even if they weren't doing anything that's, violent or unethical or anything like that. So that's a bit of a controversy in the crypto space that Coinbase would buy and acquire Neutrino, which is founded by some of the Hacking Team people. Anyway, so that's big news right now on social media. Make of that what you will. More positive news. We have So basically a large Swiss bank, private bank, is going to be offering crypto stuff, crypto services. So that's, I think they're the third largest in Switzerland. So that's pretty big news. Interesting news, bullish news. Some other news that came up this week. So MasterCard, Amazon are partnering on a transparent blockchain supply chain. So that doesn't necessarily affect crypto per se, the crypto markets, because it's just blockchain, but it is showing growth in the technology and ecosystem and use cases for it. So that's interesting. Any news that you saw this week, Chris, that you want to share?
Yeah, I was just looking through the list of stuff I've been saving. I've been more so focused on security token stuff this week than kind of general news. But
that's right. Facebook's creating their own stable coin, their own crypto.
Yeah.
Apparently read an article today. Apparently they've been reaching out to exchanges to list it. We'll see where that goes. I mean, I think it's great that, big giants are getting into the crypto space, but, it's a double-edged sword, right? Double-edged sword. They could just use Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency, but obviously they want to control that. They want to control their token or their coin or whatever it is. So it's funny how in the bear trend, suddenly like everyone's launching stable coins. Now this is where market sentiment's at. Everything drops like 90+%, and suddenly stable coins are really popular everyone's launching them. It's almost like reactionary. Obviously the time when people needed stable coins was was up there, right? And also Tether FUD was really high here. Everyone was hating on Tether. And, Tether's like, although it had counterparty risk, would have been one of those things that saved people from the volatility, not the volatility, the drawdown, massive initial drawdown.
One more thing that was supposed to be happening today was the Hong Kong investment group in T0 and Overstock. I haven't seen anything come across. People were asking about it in their Telegram. Let me see if anything's been mentioned yet. Yeah, it's the GSR group. Let me just do another search just to see if anything popped up. I haven't seen anything. Have you guys seen anything today? Oh, they did release it? Yeah, if you guys have any links, feel free to throw them in there. Yeah, I found... Okay, that's not a good site. Yeah, I don't know. So basically, for anybody that doesn't know, GSR Capital was apparently going to invest, I believe, like $400 million in T0 and or Overstock. And that deal got pushed back. The deadline was today. Yeah, I haven't seen anything, and I can't find anything right now. So, yeah, so we'll bump that to chat. If anybody finds anything, feel free to throw them in, and I'll keep looking for that today, because what that could do is, if the deal fell through, some of the token holders on the T0 exchange could just kind of be like, screw this, and then they're going to dump, and I'll be there to buy some of those. If not, it could give like a little bit of a spike to the tokens. This morning, they were still trading in the low threes. I think the last bid was, I was sitting at $3.10. I'm not sure if I got filled yet, but we'll see.
I'll join the platform. I'll set some orders at 2 cents.
Yep. Get a flash crash.
Yeah. Sweet. T0 maximalist. I'll go with my Tezos tattoo. They're kind of all right, so that's that. As far as news, that's really all I can think of this week that really stood out for me as the major events. Anybody have any questions? We could do some general Q&A to wrap up.
No.
Bit of a slower week this week.
Yeah.
Aside from the usual shenanigans. It's all algo trading right here. What do I think of Augur? Augur's interesting. I mean, it's got a functioning DApp. I don't like this chart though.
I haven't been on Augur's site in a while, but last I saw, I mean, it was like not a whole lot of activity.
Yeah, this kind of looks like it might break down for full retrace here after that spike. It's just kind of been bleeding out. My preference as far as like longer term investing or whatnot, like I don't see a trade setup on this. It looks like it could very well break down or be up here type of thing, and just do a retrace down to this zone if there's no fall through. But investment wise, I prefer investing in networks versus DApps. just because I see networks as having a higher probability of survival versus DApp, which tends to be a lot more centralized around a company or development team. You know, if those teams pack up, they lose money or whatever, then that could pretty much be the end of the DApp or the project. Whereas, and there's no real proven revenue model around many of these dApps or a lot of users and use cases. Whereas with networks, we do have more data and information on networks, you know, blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, so on and so forth, and how those can be impacted by market cycles. What do I think is Zcash? Well, I'm obviously I have some Zcash. It's my third largest bag. The market's pretty much flat and dead right now. This kind of market reminds me. This market really reminds me of like Litecoin and Ripple in the earlier days, like 2015, 2016. Everyone hated on those coins because they're just choppy and they just kept selling off or whatnot. So I think this will have its moment of sunshine in its halving, which is the same year as the Bitcoin halving. We might start to see some halving correlation or whatnot. Oh yes, speaking of news, another interesting event was the EOS hack. So basically, what was it? So this is actually quite comical. Following the EOS drama, so there's several million EOS that were moved. Basically, they blacklisted. There's 21. For anyone who doesn't know how EOS works, there's 21 delegates. They took this model from BitShares, same founder as BitShares. You have 21 delegates. They confirm all the blocks, and anybody can vote for who they want as those 21 delegates to validate those blocks. Now, what's interesting is that last year, you know, they got together and they blacklisted some EOS that was stolen from a hacker. So in Bitcoin, if a hacker steals something or hacks an exchange or whatever, you know, exchanges can certainly blacklist them and say, okay, we're not going to accept deposits from this address, and law enforcement can track those transactions. But you cannot censor those hackers from sending transactions on the network, because if you can censor it, then your network is not decentralized, right? Being censorship resistant is actually a feature that comes from decentralization. Well, and EOS, since it's just 21 people who can all get together on a Skype call, who got voted for it, so forth. And like the voting mechanism, in my opinion, is a bit kind of cronyism, because if you give yourself a majority of tokens in an ICO for your project that you created, then you can vote for your people or yourself all day, every day, and have a majority say. So one of the 21 people didn't update their blacklist address. Everyone has to update the blacklist of coins that cannot be sent from certain addresses. One person forgot, and therefore millions were able to move around and so on and so forth. Apparently, word on the street, I haven't looked into this to verify this, apparently there's only 2 full EOS nodes that have the entire record of the ledger. And so that's just really a fancy database, right? That's why it can boast thousands of transactions a second and blah, blah. Listen, if I were to rent out a couple servers, I could give you thousands of transactions a second too on my website or server database or whatnot, right? So I see it's kind of like a hybrid between blockchain and you know, a private database type of thing. So I'm not a huge EOS fan. Doesn't mean you can't trade it or make money off of it. Doesn't mean it's not going to go up. It probably will. You know. A lot of people hate on Ripple too, because it's basically one corporation owns 60% of the supply. It's just like basically makes it a continuous ICO, nonstop ICO that's been lasting 5 years, because they're still selling supply. But didn't stop Ripple from making big moves. So just because I won't invest in something because I don't like the tech or the project. Doesn't necessarily mean it can't, perform better than projects with better tech or so on and so forth. Just to give you an example, so there'd be like two full nodes there. There are approximately, I think, 7,000 full nodes on Tezos, right? And many bakers and so on and so forth. So it's a lot more decentralized. You have the capacity, I think, right now to have like 50,000 or something like that with bakers. So just shows, and it's a bit of a different system. So two full nodes, that's very, very centralized. So obviously the more nodes you have in a system, the more decentralized it is. The less power the founders have, or the more development groups you have in a system, in an ecosystem, the more decentralized it becomes. And then obviously you get features such as censorship resistant, right? That's a feature that comes with decentralization. So if you can turn off the tap and say, no, we don't like this transaction because some hacker stole some funds, then it's not permissionless money. It's not censorship free. It's not permissionless. It's permissioned money. And that's fine. People can play around with blockchain. They can create whatever tokens and projects they want. It's up to the investor, people, what they want to invest in or participate in. For any EOS fans out there, I'm not hating on it. It's just not my cup of tea. Because of that, I think it's a bit of a dangerous slope. Obviously, if you can censor transactions, then, what's to stop them from getting subpoenaed by the government and then, China censoring their transactions or anything like that, right? So it's a slippery slope for decentralized technology when you start playing that game. Ethereum had a little bit of a scandal in 2016 around the DAO hack where they hard forked to do that, to censor transactions, but they had to have a hard fork, right? So that was a big deal. That required many people in the ecosystem getting behind it and the miners getting behind it. And so there's still a process of checks and balances, decentralization behind that hard fork, even though it was like the first challenge of immutability because if you start doing that, then suddenly your blockchain is not immutable anymore. And if it's not immutable, then what's the point, right? Why not just use databases? Why even use crypto and blockchain at all, period, right? So, but now some blockchains can just, it's a feature now. You just censor transactions. So it's easy to do if there's only 21 people that can make those decisions. Anyways, long-winded story about that. None of that really impacted the EOS price that much. This is all just market correlation from Bitcoin. So not a heck of a lot happening there. Doesn't seem like, aside from exchange listings, doesn't seem like crypto projects are making huge sustainable moves on any news events right now. There's other blockchains that follow a similar model to that as well. Tron, right? TRX. Apparently there's been some people point out some plagiarism in their white paper, but anyways, they've got big marketing budgets, big market caps, all that kind of stuff, even though in my opinion, I think the tech is kind of inferior, but you don't need the best tech to be a top 20, right? Since oftentimes all you need is marketing, or big marketing, that's it, right? So that's why stuff like Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV are still in the top. They have marketing and influencers and money to throw at marketing to play around with the narrative. So long-winded rant on EOS. Questions? Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, so sorry. Let's see. Rocky, sold some of your bags for tax harvesting, but if taxes weren't a concern, would you still hold? No. I mean, tax harvesting is if you're in a jurisdiction where you have to pay taxes on gains, then tax harvesting is a good strategy. So what I tax harvested is basically just stuff that I didn't really feel was wanted in my core portfolio as long-term investing. So sometimes I'll just buy certain projects or whatnot, certain coins, just based on correlation in the chart without necessarily believing in those projects per se. If you're in a jurisdiction where you don't have to worry about taxes, tax neutral jurisdiction, then obviously there's no reason to do that. There's no reason to think about tax harvesting. There's some projects that I wouldn't tax harvest, like let's say Tezos doesn't do anything in the next year and we come up to the end of 2000. I obviously had an option of possibly doing some tax harvesting for Tezos or whatnot. If it's a project that I really like and I want to be heavily invested in, I'm not going to tax harvest because in order to do that, I would have to not trade it or buy back in for 30 days for it to not be a wash sale. In that 30 days, one could obviously risk losing their position. Not worth the risk for me. Whereas if I have some shit coins that I, not particularly attached to, and I want to just consolidate some bags into a few markets, then I could sell those, realize a tax loss, and then because it's all correlated, put it into something that I do want to hold longer term, right? But if I wasn't, so one of the benefits is you can consolidate into a few markets versus being spread out into a bunch. But if I wasn't in a jurisdiction where I had to deal with that kind of stuff, then yeah, one could, if you like the projects that you're in, one could just hold those and not have to worry about harvesting. But the harvesting gives you an extra benefit, which could even be used to offset prior gains as well. So I already answered what I think about Zcash, EOS hack. We talked about that. Could you look at the Loom network? Can stake at 20% for first year coin lockup. Okay, so apparently Loom's got delegated proof of stake. I haven't looked too much into Loom. Do you know what model proof of stake is? It the similar EOS, Tron, BitShares delegated proof of stake where you vote, or is it more of a liquid proof of stake similar to Tezos or Cardano type model? Let's just look at Loom here. I'll put this on my list, things to look at. I wouldn't mind adding, if I could find some more projects that I could just stake by holding in a hardware wallet, I wouldn't actually mind diversifying a bit into a few more. I kind of like that model. It's self-accumulating, but the price has to outpace inflation. So if it's gaining by 20% a year, then obviously its inflation rate, or its coin inflation rate is 20%. So I'll mark this on my watch list of things to look into. I'll have to look into that a little bit more closely. Eventually, Cardano will have a proof of stake model too. They'll probably follow in the same suit or vein as Tezos. The difference is Tezos has it live right now. So that's the main difference. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay, one sec. Here's another question. What do you think about scaling into LTC at these prices for a multi-month swing trade leading up to the halving in August? It's another good question. Well, I do like playing stuff like that. So, for example, you can see right now in the chart, it hit some resistance and where prior support wise. If it breaks out of that, then maybe it'll rally leading up to the halving. If there's a known event down the corner 6 months down the road or whatnot, that could lead to some FOMO, fear of missing out, some last minute spikes or whatnot, or even a possible bull trend, then I would buy something that looked like it was in a accumulation or at the lower end of the spectrum leading up to just to have some. Let's see the BTC chart. Looks a little bit different. With Litecoin, for Litecoin, I think I would need to see it break either, maybe dip down back into these lows, or for starter position, or break with some conviction, take out this this resistance right here, right? But that's definitely something interesting to make note of, the Litecoin halving in August. So there will probably be some market activity around that. Litecoin does tend to have fairly solid volume. 1 billion in 24-hour volumes, nothing to shake a stick at. So I'd be surprised if it didn't make some kind of moves leading up to it. But, leading up to the day, if it did have a rally, then on the day of the halving, you probably get a sell on the news. For the most part, halvings tend to have their biggest effect a year after the halving, right? For Bitcoin, it tends to break all-time highs like a year after the halving. I don't necessarily think Litecoin's going to break an all-time high or anything like that. I think that Litecoin, it's not going to break an all-time high unless Bitcoin does, in my opinion, because of correlation. So I don't think it'll have its halving and then suddenly Bitcoin would be chopping around the lows and then Litecoin is going to suddenly break out of the all-time highs. It might have like a small rally, but I think its bull trend, I think, will still very much be dependent on Bitcoin. It has been historically. There's a tremendous amount of correlation between Litecoin and Bitcoin. So it's not necessarily out of the woods yet. All right, so we're going up on close to an hour and a half. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
Nope, I'm good to go.
All right.
As long as everybody's clear on kind of the possibilities, probabilities, and plans on Bitcoin. And really, I mean, everything else is kind of hinged to that at the moment, right? I don't see anything that's really diverging in a really strong way. I've got some small bets out there, really looking at T0, but that's a longer term play. Spending some time on the Brave browser this week, and is bad a trade cycle to cycle? It could be. Yeah, I mean, well, so here's the thing. There's really two ways that it could go. It's either gonna whenever we have the next bull cycle, it'll likely get a raise just from that. But also, I'm looking at projects that could diverge from Bitcoin, right? And I expect that to happen sometime this year, where we're going to start to see some projects that just, no matter what Bitcoin does, they kind of float freely. But that's going to take time, and it's not going to be everything. So that's why I like to, throughout the year, I'll, like January, I'll usually study, like, say I do a deep dive on 2 projects, and then the next month I do another couple of projects. And then by the end of the year, it's like, oh, okay, I've done deep dives on a lot of new stuff. And then out of those, you'll get, I mean, it really depends on the market cycle, but maybe a handful of them that'll actually take off. And it's just good if you can do that work up front. So, I mean, for now, again, like I don't even really consider this a trade. It's just an early, like, small position, just to put it on my radar and to allow me to play with it, send some BAT tokens around, and, load some up in different browsers and play around with it. But that's really where I'm at, is just kind of the discovery phase of that. So, yep. So that's it. That's all I got for this week. Kind of slow, but there's a lot of development happening behind the scenes, which is deceiving for some people. Some people associate slow with bad, but that's definitely not the case at all. Oftentimes the slower times is when you can build and position yourself and get ready, and like we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. So
yeah, absolutely. I still feel pretty good about another market cycle, even though nothing's guaranteed. As long as the industry continues growing, like I've said many times before, I think this is a relatively small total market cap for the crypto industry. And I think until we hit market saturation, we'll probably have more of the same as far as the cycles are concerned. It just might get a little bit longer and longer each time. But
Yep.
one last thing that I will say that I have been looking at and probably will add to my investment bags is I want to find some kind of other proof of stake coin that's relatively decent. It'd be nice if I could stake Cardano through a hardware wallet, but I don't believe I can. But if there's something that has decent enough fundamentals, that's not just like a total shitcoin that I can stake on a hardware wallet, I'd probably add some, not as a massive size position, but I'll probably add some of that, to my portfolio. But just to recap, my main investments that I have right now in order sizes: Bitcoin, Tezos, Zcash, Holochain, and then I have like some ZRX and all this smattering, just a sprinkle of AGI. And I'd like to add probably ADA to that mix, some Cardano to that mix. It's on my list. Maybe some BAT. I've been looking at BAT too. I'm kind of along the same lines as Chris. It's got a working product right now. It has, because it's dealing with marketing and advertising and doing something new and interesting with it. It has the ability to grow and to scale if it turns into something interesting. We'll see, but it wouldn't be a massive size position either for BAT. Ideally, I'd like to find another self accumulator like Tezos. So that's pretty much it. We've gone on about an hour and a half, so I think we'll wrap it up there. All right, folks, so take care. Cheers.